last time at the earlier part of that, and these two stories go one after another. And they deal with Jesus and the Sabbath. And of course, they're not the only ones we find with Jesus dealing with the Sabbath and what we might call legalistic people, specifically the Pharisees. But these are interesting. In this one, we see Jesus on the Sabbath go into a synagogue, starting in verse 9. Now when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath, that they might accuse him? Jesus has already allowed his disciples to rub some wheat or barley grain and basically feed themselves because they're hungry. And that's already caused some issue. Well, now he goes into their synagogue. Mark and Luke tell us that Jesus actually draws the attention to this man. Here's a man with a withered hand. Now, there's a story much later that this guy was a mason who had hurt his hand, and it was his right hand, so he couldn't work. Problem is, we don't know if that story's accurate. What we do know is that the idea is that the hand is sunken and unable to work. It's literally a malady that is both social to some extent, but largely work-related. You can't do a lot with that. Jesus, and I think they've probably noticed this before by now, Jesus is the kind of person that he sees people with compassion. Now, he'll take a stand. He'll call out wrong, but he sees people with compassion. And that is something to keep in mind. Jesus apparently calls attention to this man, and the Pharisees that are right here, they see an opportunity. And this isn't going to be the last opportunity, but they're going to look for these opportunities. So they have an initial question. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And of course, they did this for the purpose of accusing him. Now, there's a difference between tradition and law. And the Pharisees had started to blur those lines quite a bit. We're Baptists. We have traditions. Fried chicken goes with any church outing. We like to oftentimes start services with prayer and end services with prayer. May I say the biggest Baptist thing I know? We do the first, second, and fourth verse. Now, is there anything that says we got to do any of that? No. Some of our traditions are fun. Some of them are interesting. But traditions are traditions, okay? I know this is not always something that is like to be said, but I'm going to say this, and I've got no problem with the way we've got it. But there's a tradition of 2 services on the day. Despite what some people I've heard some Baptists say, that goes back to Christ, but they can never prove any information. It actually started in America, and it had more to do with farmers. They could come early, go do some work, and come in the afternoon. Well, that's accommodating so that way you can continue ministry. I understand that. But there's nothing in the Bible that says we've got to do it that way. But I like that. I like the way that works. There's a difference between lawful and tradition. Remember, the Pharisees have desired to protect the law. Not just them, but those that came before them. And so they've added these traditions. Now what they claim then and now is this. Moses gave the written law, but then he gave the oral law. And the oral law is the oral tradition to help understand the law and add to it. Here's my question. Why do we need the written one? And if the answer is so that way it would not be forgotten, then why would you trust the oral one alone? As we look at it, as we look at the verbiage and all of that, it does not go back to Moses. All right? It's a later addition for the purpose of protection, but it did what? It went too far. So when they ask, is it lawful? There's nothing in the law that includes healing. Now, in the tradition, there was certain things. In the instance of someone on death's door, someone, their life could be on the line, you should act. Outside of that, they should wait till the next day. Well, it could get worse if you wait till the next day. I don't know. But that was their mindset. Look with me in verse 11. Then he said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep?" So what Jesus does, this is classic Jewish discussion and debate. So that we see Jesus, why does he act like this? No. He's acting within his culture. It's perfectly acceptable to respond from one question with another question. Okay? It's still addressing it, and the purpose of it is to come back around and explain what his answer to the original question was. So he says, "What man is there among you who has a sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out?" And there's actual parts within the oral tradition that allowed this. Now, what was this kind of mindset? Let's give you a visual. They had predators in Israel. Naturally, they had wolves, lions, which were closer to what we might think of mountain lions, but they're lions, I guess you should put it that way. They had forms of bears. Now, you may say those aren't there anymore. You can hunt something to extinction. We do have evidence that they were there. Well, one of the best ways in that area is to dig a pit and to try to lure them in those things so they will fall down, and then you can get rid of the predator. But what happens with pits? Things that are not predators tend to fall in from time to time too. So in this instance, the idea is that of a sheep. Do you think Jesus just used an idea that had never occurred? No, he used something they would have understood, something that had happened before. Guess what? The sheep could wait till the next day, but they would still get it out on the Sabbath. So here's basically what the implication is. You're ascribing more value to a sheep than to a human. You're ascribing more value to an animal that is an object of monetary value than to a fellow human being. Now, this is not a call for socialism or communism. This is a call for value the other human being. If you can help them, help them. That's kind of easy. And so this, in the second part of this question of how much more value then is a man than a sheep, this goes back to the Old Testament where God made man in his image. He didn't make sheep in his image. He didn't make ox or any of the other animals in his image. It was man. So we're ascribed more value than sheep. Doesn't mean that we're supposed to treat sheep with no care. They're under our care. We're supposed to take care of them. But Jesus is using what's called in Hebrew kal v'chomer argument. What's that mean? Less to greater. If this less point is true, then this greater point has to be true. If getting a sheep out of a pit on the Sabbath is considered okay, then helping a human being must be deemed okay. He says, therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Now we do. Ava, sit and make no work. Do nothing. Just sit. What does it mean by doing good? I want to address this because this can be taken way too far. We can understand good in a lot of things, can't we? So very quickly, we can choose not to go to church. We can choose not to read our Bibles. We can choose not to pray, not to worship God. We can do a lot of things. What would be deemed as good from the context? Helping another human in immediate need or in helpful need. That's what's the context. So you could say, mowing my lawn is good. Personally, I don't think that's appropriate on Sunday, but that's just me. You may say, cleaning my car is good, but it's not what's going on with the context. Jesus has this tendency to take the point he's making and then emphasize it with healing. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. That's the other thing about Jesus' healings that are amazing. When you think of someone that heals naturally, they have to have sometimes therapy in an instance like this. I don't know if we've ever seen something quite like this, but it has to have therapy to get that natural strength back, that natural response, that ability to actually know what you're doing with it because you haven't used it in so long. It was automatic. The strength was not only was the shape and the muscles restored, the strength and the ability, all of it restored. That's a miracle. The text goes on to say, then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him, assassinate him, kill him. Now do note there are different groups of Jewish religious figures and religious groupings. You have the Pharisees, you have the Sadducees. You also have a group called the Essenes. Unfortunately, people sometimes connect them with others when they shouldn't. Some will say, well, Essenes did not allow even for a sheep to be pulled out of a pit on the Sabbath day. That's true. Essenes made up maybe, 1% of the population. They were not the norm, all right? The Pharisees were the most populous. You had a couple other groups that were political. You had the group that was more aligned with Herod's family, the Herodians. You also had those that were extreme and that wanted to be known to free Israel. Jesus is going to have most of his disagreements with the Pharisees because they're the most populous. So even the Pharisees amongst themselves had some issues on this. But notice how they see Jesus, because Jesus didn't just answer their question. He not only proved them wrong, he drastically proved them wrong. And to them, he had just desecrated their honor. Now, we live in a country that, honor, who cares? But it does matter. You look at other countries, there can be death over that. This was a different time. The problem of the matter is, if they just read their Old Testament, their honor would be shattered pretty quickly if they read it in context. A lot of people today, even in churches, their honor would be broken pretty quickly if they read the Bible as it is written and not how they want to read it. Don't read the Bible the way you want it. Read it for what it says. And where there's difference between you and it, you need to change. The same goes with me and everybody else. This is our guide, not this. What can we gather from this? Well, there's a few things we can gather. We can gather once again, Jesus is not intimidated. I think that's something that's not often pointed out. Jesus is not intimidated. He doesn't shrink back. He stays and he finishes what's done. We can also learn that Jesus uses the culture to interact with the culture. Not in a negative way. He doesn't take on the bad parts of the culture. He uses the way they can talk and they can debate to help interact. That's appropriate. We can also see Jesus goes back to the teaching of the Old Testament. Nowhere in the Old Testament does it say you cannot heal someone on the Sabbath or help someone on the Sabbath. If anything, when you understand that man was made in the image of God, and there are many laws about helping your fellow man, it would go without saying that even on the Sabbath, you should help someone. We also see here that Jesus has compassion. He heals this man, even though he knows they're going to be angry. He heals this man out of compassion. But we also learn here that Jesus makes enemies even when he does what's right. Which is all the time, but in the face of angry observers, he makes enemies because he will not change to do anything but what's right. How often have you decided, I won't do the right thing because of the way everybody will look at me? It's easy to look at school and to think about that. But the same can happen in the workplace. The same can happen in the families. Those happen too. The same can happen in the neighborhood. How often will we shrink back from doing what's right because we don't want others to see us, because it'll make us look bad or we'll be labeled as something? Let's follow Jesus. Do what's right despite what people think, because it's right. Testament, under the New Covenant. We are not under the Sabbath of the Old Testament. But the concept is a good one to attach. We find very quickly, after the resurrection, that they would meet on the first day of the week, Sunday. Why? The resurrection. It was their celebration. They would use that as an opportunity. We do the same. I think if we are to take the concept of the Old Testament, the concept of God should be honored and that man should have rest, I think Sunday's a fine day to take some time off. I think Sunday's an excellent day to be able to gather with other believers, learn and bear one another's burdens. I think those are excellent things to do. I also think that if someone's in need, you can be late for church to help them. That's perfectly fine. If someone's in need, you may miss that service. But call ahead, not because you want everyone to know that, okay, I didn't do anything bad. No, you want them to pray for that person and what's going on. There are legitimate reasons to honor God in multiple ways, and sometimes that means you may have to miss service. Sometimes that may mean that you may be late. You're honoring God when you help another human being from a biblical perspective. Now with that,